You start volume 2 speaking about poverty, material
Yes,
poverty and spiritual
yes,
poverty.
that's right. Yes, most certainly. I mentioned Gandhi, uh, who said, of course, to a hungry man in India, and my gosh, I know what that looks like and sounds like, having lived in India. To a hungry man, a loaf of bread, a slice of bread, not a loaf, a slice of bread, is the face of God, of course. But I then certainly make the point that as we now approach Christmas, and the turkeys certainly won't be singing Happy Christmas with us, poor things. There is more than enough spiritual poverty in the world, and that, in a sense, is even more insidious. And that spiritual poverty, the point I'm making, of course, it's not appeased in any way by the Western wealthy nations by resorting to excessive materialism or luxury or excessive technology and wealth. It still creates that poverty, and even more so, more of a vacuum.
There's a longing here that, of course, calls for fulfillment, but at the same time, this longing is never fulfilled. Perhaps this takes us away from volume 2, but since you mentioned that in the spiritual sense, in secular societies, which we tend to pretend that longing is not there or that we can fulfill it by other means. What does perennial philosophy offer to this ever-present longing, which is also a spur, but at the same time, there should be some sense of fulfillment along the
Yeah.
way.
No, I don't think it's taking us away from volume two, because it's all within the umbrella of man know thyself. So,
Yes.
what we are longing for, we are longing to come home in the deepest sense. And I think Jung said all psychological malaise is a homesickness of the soul. It is a homesickness. So there is this longing to come home, but it's not arriving at a destination in the sort of physical sense, of course. But even in the physical sense, when you've had a hard day out in the cities or whatever, you're longing to come home. And what home provides is that serenity, that focus, that peace, and that ability to find yourself again when you've been rushing around and doing all the usual things. So the perennial philosophy offers that methodology, so you can see your path home. It's up to you to choose your path. But as we said much earlier on, it can't possibly provide all the answers to all problems. That's ridiculous. But like an expert motorist driving home, he can't see every traffic light and every pothole and every roadblock. But if he's an expert motorist, he can negotiate these blocks and come home. So that's what the perennial philosophy provides, that overall mental culture.
I can tell you're a motorist, so am I. Otherwise, you wouldn't have used that example.
I'll tell you something quickly, Àlex. I could fly gliders years before I could drive a car. I love flying. I don't go gliding now only because of time, but I loved gliding. I really did. That sense of freedom, the quiet, and also you only have one chance. You only have one chance to land a glider.
Yeah.
So it's very different from powered aircraft flying. Yeah.
I can imagine. And it brings me to another point you make at the introduction of volume 1. I don't recall you use this expression, but I'll use it. You speak about dark mind in the sense that you say, well, there's we, as always, we are thankful to what science has done, and yet there's dark energy, there's dark matter. It's
Yeah.
incomplete, it's insufficient.
Yes.
And in a way, what you are going to unfold in the following chapters, to me, it felt like all these secrets of dark mind. I mean, and I know it's not about mind per se, but there are all these realms that are subtle, that are nuanced, that are sometimes confused within the same word where they shouldn't. And perhaps like flying, now we can see them all and realize the nuances and the differences and put them in place. And then we can start to appreciate what these volumes of yours are conveying. But we need to gain those skills. And I was also making this analogy with a physicist. If you wanna be a physicist, you need to learn mathematics. If you want to be a pianist, you need to go through the force of will to be able to learn how to read a score, what's harmony. I mean, it's not like that, okay, I want to be a physicist and that comes for free. The same here. We need to learn many different concepts and slowly get into that.
Well said, Àlex. I was practicing the piano for nearly 2 hours this morning. Wonderful. And my goodness, the subtlety you find in the scores of the great good. I was just practicing a Chopin piece, but there is never-ending inspiration to see between the notes, between the lines. So, yes, you have to learn the notes. You have to learn the pianistic skills. In physics, you've got to learn mathematics, and you've got to learn the terminology as well. Yes. But you mentioned dark energy, dark mind, dark energy. Of course, according to NASA, roughly 5% of matter is baryonic matter. That's matter in the conventional atomic state. Well, if 95% is something we don't know, perhaps we could ask the question whether our subtle bodies and our subtle energies might be, I'm not saying they might be something to do with these subtler energies and almost by definition in higher dimensions. And a recent book by Robert Temple, which I haven't read, but I believe he says that 99% of the universe is plasma, which is one of the 4 states of matter. So again, I'm just saying, Mr. Physicist, I applaud what you're doing, but you cannot reduce the whole world just to your physics. Look beyond. Mm-hmm. And it's not that others are talking about these things. Our physicists are talking about these subtler energies. So from within your own camp, there are insights.
Totally. That's when physicists start to transcend their own discipline. That's a good sign. It means they're peeping beyond the boundaries and then going into the unknown. Mm. Now, it surprised me that the first chapter of Volume 2 was about clearing confusions, right? Maybe because I have this energy. Okay, let's go into it. And you're doing it. You're drawing us into perennial philosophy, and we've seen already quite a big bulk of content in Volume 1. But here's like a good teacher in a way. Hold on. There's some untidying here to do, some splitting, some. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult later because you don't have the things in their proper place. So tell us about all those confusions.
All those, oh my gosh, yes. Well, not surprisingly, Àlex, when we're talking of a philosophy of all ages and all cultures and all times, therefore all different languages and geographical reasons, there's bound to be confusion and bound to be differences of opinion and all. So one of the things we need to do, of course, is to try and list the main sources of that confusion. And one of the first one is obviously all these various languages and various tongues. Then the contribution of the Theosophical Society, the wonderful contribution, where they described our constitution and our nature, man. Man means, of course, man and woman, man, the thinker, in 2 ways, either in terms of the animating principle or the vehicle or bodies through which the animation occurs. In other words, either through principles or using planes. And we can just quickly unpack that. The third cause of confusion is minds that only operate in black and white dichotomies. One has to see that truth is folded in paradox. The paradox has folds, and in those folds, the truth is concealed. So if it's going to be just black or white, then you just won't get anywhere. You've got to see that dynamic tension between those two polarities of black and white. The third confusion is category errors, where, especially in science, where things belonging to a particular category are presented belonging to a different category. So, for example, you can't talk of psychical experiences in terms of the physical realism. You can't talk of astrology in terms of the laws of physics. That's different categories. Another source of confusion is mixing up levels, where something that is stated at a higher level is taken to a lower level. Those are some of the main confusions. But the point about language is there is a language suited to a particular discipline. Now, English is marvelously suited to the objective sphere. I give the example that in English, you can beautifully describe the components of a jet engine. You've got compressors and combustion chambers and turbines and gas flow. There are no words in Sanskrit for combustion chamber, compressor, and turbine. But Sanskrit is admirably suited to the subjective realms of our being. So that is the ideal language. But we're not expecting people to embark on a Sanskrit course, but one does expect an earnest student to try and understand the subtlety that's hidden in the Sanskrit.
All of this sounds very sensible to me, because, again, if I bring it back to the sciences, well, those confusions actually happen as well in physics and in neuroscience. People confuse levels. We make category mistakes.
Okay.
And it's also common that it takes us some time to learn what each other mean by their particular use of jargon. And sometimes we need to, struggle over words and finally agree on what we're meaning, and perhaps coin new words or go find those words so that new concepts can be on the table. So that makes a lot of sense to see it now applied or happening when we're discussing perennial philosophy.
I mean, the new words, I believe, not just in physics, but in the overall psychological field, are syntropy is one word. Supercausality is another word. These are new words. Emergentism, for example. These are the new words that are coming out, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes. Now, would you like to start by, well, there are a few words really important here. You mentioned principle and plane, also levels, and maybe towards the end we can talk about nature and constitution. I think these are kind of the five basic key elements, and we need to have them right.
Yes, we certainly are. Yeah. Now, the word principles and planes comes really from the early classical theosophical literature, which were the only words then available in English to express the Sanskrit terms. And it was at a time when the English meaning had not quite settled down. So, well, let's just start with principle. A principle is really, it's quite simple. It's the action of some power or some conscious entity within and up to its range of influence. So every conscious entity, an active entity, has a range of influence. Or putting it slightly differently, a principle is a particular mode of manifesting life at any given level. And a plane is the substance or the medium through which it acts. So it's the medium or the vehicle of its expression and its range of action. So as a bare abstraction, then, the active potentiality, which is known as spirit, is manifested through matter. I don't mean physical matter. Matter, its medium of expression. In English, we only use the word spirit, and to say the spirit world and the inhabitants of the spirit world is very loose. But in a general sense, then, we can say that man's principles, his active the conscious entity, they are expressed and acted out through his physical and subtle bodies, which therefore exist on the various planes of existence, physical and higher. And these planes are, and the subtle bodies associated with them, coexist in higher orders of existence. So those are the older terms, principle and plane, the active and the passive. Now, in modern physics, we use words like field and dimension of space rather than plane of existence. So a field in modern physics is a region or sphere of influence that's radiated out by a physical agency. And that sphere of influence extends beyond the physical dimensions of the object or whatever. So, for example, you have the agency of mass and magnetic dipole that produce their corresponding gravitational field and their magnetic field. Now, the magnetic field extends far beyond the dimensions just of the magnet. A bar magnet 1 inch long, the magnetic field is much, much further. So in one sense, you can regard a body as the field of influence of that conscious entity, rather than regarding a body as an objective thing like an overcoat or onion skins to be peeled off. Regard a body as the field of influence of that conscious entity. So the field or plane is the passive medium for which matter is the bare abstract term being the medium for the expression.
As you're saying this, Eddie, the last couple of minutes, as you were so precisely explaining those terms, that bit could have belonged perfectly to a theoretical physics class at university. Totally. Yeah. Totally. Because when we speak about principles, for instance, the principle of least action.
Least action. Yes.
What we're talking about is a sort of agency that if you go and ask, well, what's behind, most of the time we don't know, or we need to resort to some mathematical ideas like symmetries. But basically it's a sort of agency that's acting upon what? Well, in that case, we can talk about electrons, we can talk about regions of space, and there's always this interesting dual aspect which permeates all your volumes, right? Of something acting and something allowing
it to act.
Yes,
otherwise,
yes.
The action is potential.
Exactly.
It doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yes.
And at all levels, we have spirit and matter. And unfortunately, matter is associated with physical matter. That's just one aspect of matter, of the principle of matter, if I can put it that way. Another word people use is substance. In the Samkhya philosophy, there's Purusha and Prakriti, root matter, but we'll go there later on.
Yes, yes.
But it's really quite simple to see that there is always this active agency, and for it to manifest, it needs a vehicle or a medium. Yes. And it's as simple as that.
Yes.
And we can call it principle and plane, or we can call it agency and field.
Even the word matter, as you just mentioned, it's much more open and beautiful than when we tend to think about. And also
like
it has to do with
Gilchrist has shown, what's the matter with matter?
yes, and the matter with things. No, sure, no, totally. The matter with things, indeed.
Yeah.
Matter also means mother. I sometimes wonder if we took the word materialism and we added another T, materialism, like the word matter with double T, that would be completely different. If we're talking about that kind of matter, that understanding of matter, that receptive principle, if we want, we're all in, or rather that receptive plane, right?
Yeah.
We're all in there, even if we're not materialists with one T.
That's right. That's perfectly stated, Àlex. Matter, mother, matrix. And another way of looking at this, since you mentioned mother, the active and the passive, is the seed and the soil. The seed is the active, the soil is the passive. The two have got to come together for the fruit.
Yes.
So the principle of the seed and the soil is, and I'm using principle or the concept of the seed and the soil, is another way of looking at the active and the passive.
Yes. Now, principle is more abstract, plane is more concrete, and yet it's easily conflated, because when we say plane, we imagine, well, here's one plane, here's another one, and you speak about this fallacy of the cake, right? The layers on a cake, and then things kind of as if they were in an elevator going up and down the planes, and that's kind of a way people talk about it, but it's more subtle than that again.
It is, yes, and that did cause a lot of confusion inevitably, because in speaking and in writing you cannot but put one thing on top of another to explain things. I like to use the analogy in music. We don't have to play one note after another like in a scale or an arpeggio. We can play a chord, and a chord has all the notes with their overtones. But we can't talk in chords. We can't write in chords. So inevitably, in language and writing, we have to put one thing on top of another, but that gives the impression of geological strata or layers of a cake, a sponge base and cream topping and a strawberry on the top. But these are just aspects of one thing. We are one unitary being, and all of these subtle bodies, spheres of influence, are our different aspects.
Yes,
and I've given a simplistic analogy of the 3 and the 7 in volume 1.
And you also write some examples to help us grasp it.
Exactly,
for instance, I particularly enjoy that one when discussing levels and this confusion across levels. That phrase, well, we're all spiritual beings, right? Well, yes, we are. I mean, I like it really when I find Edi, the Edi that's critiquing with love, of course, but also, frankly, the misunderstandings on the other side, right? It's like, sure, we're all spiritual beings. Now, what does it mean in this level? Perhaps it doesn't mean what you think it means. So please.
Yes. I've often found, Àlex, that when I get extremely irritated, it can sometimes spur, something, well, I wouldn't say my best writing, it's never the best, but something valuable that comes out of it. But we are all spiritual beings. Something I heard at a SMN conference, and everyone applauded. I thought, really? But I'm very quickly unpacking that. The word Brahma comes from breathe, to breathe out. So the universe and everything and all its contents are breathed out. And the word Atma, from to inspire. So from the highest level, we have been breathed out. So we're all spiritual beings at the highest level. But then, if you take a step further, does it mean that you and I, Hitler and Churchill and Mozart and Schubert and all the monsters are spiritual beings? Well, you can say, yes, they are. They've all been breathed out, Brahma. But how utterly nonsensical, because there are different levels. And if you want a, how can I say, a rather more crude analogy, don't take it too far. Breath can be very sweet and breath can be pretty foul as well.
Yes.
So at the highest level, we are spiritual beings, but there are different levels. There are the spiritual, the psychic, the mental, the physical. So confusing those levels just causes nonsensical arguments.
How are we to visualize those levels? Because we're so trapped in spatial metaphors, right? An
Yes.
onion, a cake, you mentioned.
Yeah,
Perhaps
yeah,
what you just said about music and notes and chords and melody
yeah.
is as close as one gets.
Overtones.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
overtones, I think, are the best way from one fundamental note. The overtones aren't stacked one on top of the other. They are the flowers, the petals that have come out of the one bud, so to speak.
Now, then you go and remind us that the big question at stake here is about who am I? Who are we? What are we? What about man? And here you introduce, I think, a foundational distinction for volume 2, which is the nature, right? And the constitution of man.
Yeah. Yes. The two are really two sides of one coin. Your constitution is how you are, how you build it up. Now, I've used this quaint word, build it up. It's not my word. Others have used it. Built, B-U-I-L-T, in the past tense, implies that, the construction's finished, that's it. But build it's a constant process of building. So our constitution is our structure, how we build it up. Our nature is how we function as a result of our constitution. Now, see the perfect example of as above, so below. In medical science, we talk of anatomy and physiology. Anatomy, our structure, physiology, our activity. So we see a perfect example of the higher principle applied superbly in medical science. So our constitution, man as system, is the difference between system and function. Constitution and nature, man as system, nature, our powers as a result of our constitution, our potentiality and our capacity. Our capacity can only be an expression of our potentiality. What we are, our essential being, and how we act as a result of our essential being. So in chapter 1, I say, we can only act as we are, and we are as we act. So someone who is a physical being, a sportsman, a footballer, he's unlikely to be playing a Steinway piano or be found with a Stradivarius in his hands. A sensitive musician is unlikely to be seen running around a muddy field. I'm not saying one is better than the other, don't get me wrong. But your actions are a reflection of your nature and the other way around.
I also see this. You were alluding to the Hermetic principle totally, because in neuroscience, where I spend a lot of time thinking and working, it's very important to distinguish the implementational level with the algorithmic level.
So the first
the implementational level, which is about what the actual neurons, how they're wired together, what they're made of, and so on. And the algorithmic, which is all of that is serving a function. And again, we tend to see them as layers on a cake, and then we draw arrows. But even jumping between those two levels in neuroscience, it's far from trivial. And they need to be distinguished and then brought back together and then distinguished again and so on in order to make sense of what we're studying.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, again, you've shown me the Hermetic principle working, as indeed it does in all spheres of life.
you also use the example of a person at home and at work. And these examples are very valuable, Eddie, I think, because we go from such kind of, you can almost feel the weight of these ideas, right? It's as if you were showing us kind of a treasures, secret pearls, and so on. And then you go and make them kind of like feathers and light by using very everyday life examples. So I would like you to unfold a bit the one of our everyday lives at home and at work.
Everyday life is very important because, as we said earlier on, the spiritual life is the ordinary, so-called ordinary everyday life. And I think that example, I believe I chose that example to show that even though we can, so to speak, divide man into 2, 3, 5, 7, however many, we're really dealing with one essential being. So, for example, the human body, just a physical body. Now, body is a collective term. It's a generalizing term for a whole host of subsystems, which are, at their level, their own bodies that embody their own subsystems. So we are a body, but for medical purposes, we can view our body as head, torso, and limbs. But that doesn't mean we're three things stuck together with glue. Now, in terms of 3, 5, or 7, again, we can be a family man, we can be a brother, and we can be a worker at work. So 3 aspects. But, we're not 3 separate beings. We display 3 aspects of our being, but when we are fast asleep or completely silent, then we're not a worker, a family man, or anything else. We're just one being. But these different aspects unfold depending on the circumstance. So that's an example to show that we can view our activity in 3 ways, in 5 ways, in 7 ways. And the family man can be further unpacked into father, brother, relative, grandfather, all of that. But not separate things. They are unfolding from the one.
Let me point out to you that as you speak again, I see behind your books, well, we all know, or we all trying to make sense of consciousness, but here the word unfolding, you just mentioned it, right? Is this the sense in which we're talking about unfolding consciousness in this very sense of it manifesting in different ways in our own being through many bodies? Could you say something more about the word unfolding, since it seems to flow naturally from this example you just made, brought back to, let's zoom out now as much as we can, brought back to the main title of your 4 volumes?
Well, unfolding, when you get something through the post, a package, you have to unwrap it, don't you? to remove the wrapping paper and all the rest of it. Yes. To see what's inside. So it is just literally doing that. It is unpeeling the layers that conceal.
Yes.
So unfolding is, in this sense, unpeeling, but in another sense, I keep coming back to the flower, which is such a beautiful symbol. The petals are not being unpeeled from the bud. They're growing out of the bud.
Yes.
But they're not separate from the bud.
Yes, exactly.
They are the visual expression of the innate potentiality of the bud.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But I think one of the points I made earlier was that, and this is so vital, then people try and say, I don't understand, and how come, and all the rest of it, is that our external powers, our physical external senses, only perceive the phenomena. It's only our internal faculties that recognize their noumena, their causative factors. And when people ask, where is their proof of soul and how do you prove it? And, well, you can't in terms of your external powers, but in terms of your inner faculties, you can't prove it, but you can sense it. Because throughout all the ages, man has sensed this internal faculty, this internal, they've sensed this internal spiritual body, if you want, by want of a better term, which comes under words such as Christos for the Christians, Krishna for the Hindus, Avalokiteshvara for the Buddhists. And this is not superstition or bigotry at all, because it is an instinctive understanding of inner invisible spiritual world, which, even though it is subjective to us, to our outer senses, it is very objective to our inner senses. And the more we understand something, the more we objectify what is subjective. Subjective means to throw under, objective is to throw in front. So the more we try and understand something, what was vague and subjective, thrown under, gets thrown in front of us objectively. So again, objective, subjective, these are relative terms and abstract terms that have got to be taken at the level they apply.
Again, how subtle the language, and also how, well, I like to make this distinction often between something being obvious and something being trivial, right? This is obvious, but it's not trivial what you're saying. Even the very idea of, well, our inner, and then some people say, well, if you say inner versus outer, like you feel it inside, they're literally minded, and they think inside must be somewhere inside the skin, inside the skull, right? And well, of course not. And that doesn't mean we're talking nonsense. And it's both, again, it's both sophisticated and at the same time, I think everybody can get it. I mean, it's not a weird thing to say. It's just when we are so literally minded that we lose all these distinctions.
Subtleties, yes.
I'd like to start wrapping up by, if you don't mind, just reading the titles of the chapters of volume 2, so that people have a sense, so they have a flavor of what's coming, because it's pretty exciting. So today we covered chapter 1, what occult science says about the composition of man, clearing the decks, clearing the confusions. Then chapter 2 and chapter 3 chapter 2 is the occult constitution of man. And
the anatomy and physiology.
Yes, how man is built up. And chapter 3 is the occult nature of man. So this distinction you just made today. Then chapter 4 is about the 3 selves, man's 3 primary vehicles. Again, a very important word, vehicles of consciousness. Chapter 5 is death is transition, time at the door of eternity. 6 is clarifying some common misconceptions. Again, you see how careful it's like you clean before cooking, and then at some point it's time to clean again so that we can continue preparing some of these delicious meals. Yes. 6, clarifying some common misconceptions. 7, is the brain a wet computer? 8, diverse classifications of the composition of man. So we're going to a finer resolution and understanding here. And then the coda of volume 1 is how to construct and energize a human being, a temple of the divine. And very interestingly, because sometimes the appendices of books are there as, well, that's where their appendices, they're there, they seem they're not doing much, but I often find like a lot of treasures in them. And here we have appendix A, light, ether, and the theory of relativity. This is wonderful because we hear so much about quantum physics, but very little about relativity. And there's some esoteric teachings there, as I understand. Yes. Appendix B, Antakarana, its purpose and function. And Appendix C, the traditionalist stance and mindset. Truth from just one authority, ? So this is what lies ahead for volume 2.
And when we talk of function, there are at least 2 principles at work. So for something to act, I mean, even for a finger to move, there has got to be 2 things to happen. There's got to be the finger and the hand to which it's joined. So so when we talk of function, there are always two principles, that at least two, that need to come together. Yes, so that's the the land ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much for having written these, and I can't wait to go and discuss all of these chapters step by step with you, Edi.
That's wonderful to share this with you, and thank you very much. It's so nice to be with someone who is so sensitive and appreciative, and I really mean that. It makes all the difference.
I feel an ignorant in a good sense, like some sort of innocence. I want to know about these things. They resonate. I quite often never heard of some of the things you're writing about, and it's making me good, I would say, and I hope it does good to the people who listen. And by the way, I've been approached by some colleagues and friends, expressing interest in your books, and hopefully these teachings can be more widespread, as they should, perhaps, or as they could. I'm not sure if they should, but as they could.
Good.
Yes. All right.
Thank you, Àlex. Okay.
See you soon, Edi.
See you next Friday.